After the funeral, he asked, "When do I get my cut?" I answered with 3 words, "You already did." The autumn rain in Chicago was relentless that October morning, drumming against the windows of St. Mary's Cathedral as I adjusted my black uniform and watched my partner of 23 years being carried down the aisle in a flag-draped coffin. Detective Michael Torres had been more than just a colleague. He had been my brother in blue, my confidant during the darkest cases, and the closest thing to family I had after my wife Sarah passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. The tension in the church was palpable, not just from grief, but from the bitter family dynamics that had been tearing the Torres family apart for the past decade. Michael's son Danny, now 35 and unemployed for the 3rd time this year, sat in the front pew with his wife Jessica, both dressed in expensive clothes that clearly didn't match their financial reality. They had been living off Michael's generosity for years, constantly asking for loans that never got repaid and expecting bailouts every time their poor decisions caught up with them. If this story is touching your heart, please comment below where you're watching from. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel because we truly help families going through difficult situations like this one. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of overcoming adversity and family challenges. What Danny and Jessica didn't know was that Michael had made significant changes to his will 6 months before his death. Changes that were prompted by their increasingly demanding behavior and complete lack of respect for the sacrifices he had made throughout his career. As a decorated detective who had spent 30 years serving the community, Michael had accumulated a modest but substantial retirement fund, life insurance policies, and owned his house outright in a decent neighborhood on the South Side. During the past year, Danny had become particularly aggressive in his demands for money, showing up at Michael's house drunk multiple times, demanding advances on his inheritance, and making threats about what would happen if his father didn't support his latest get-rich-quick schemes. The final straw came when Danny had brought his drug dealer friends to Michael's home, using his father's address for their illegal activities and putting Michael's reputation and pension at risk. The funeral service was conducted by Father Rodriguez, who had known Michael since he was a rookie cop walking the beat in Pilsen, a predominantly Latino neighborhood where Michael had grown up and later chosen to serve as a police officer. The priest spoke about Michael's dedication to his community, his integrity in the face of corruption, and his unwavering commitment to justice even when it cost him promotions and political favor within the department. Chicago's weather in October is notorious for its unpredictability, with cold winds sweeping off Lake Michigan and creating that bone-chilling dampness that seems to penetrate even the thickest coats. The cemetery service was brief but dignified, with a 21-gun salute from the honor guard and the presentation of the folded flag to Michael's elderly mother, Maria, who had flown in from Puerto Rico despite her failing health and limited financial means. As the mourners began to disperse, heading to the reception at the Knights of Columbus Hall on Western Avenue, I noticed Danny and Jessica whispering intensely near their car, occasionally glancing in my direction with expressions that seemed more calculating than grief-stricken. They had been unusually friendly to me during the viewing the night before, asking pointed questions about Michael's finances and whether I knew anything about his arrangements for the family. The reception was typical of Chicago police gatherings, with colleagues sharing stories about Michael's bravery, his sense of humor, and his legendary ability to solve cold cases that other detectives had given up on. The hall was filled with retired officers, current detectives, and community members whose lives had been touched by Michael's service over the decades. The spread included traditional Puerto Rican dishes that Maria had insisted on preparing despite her grief, wanting to honor her son's heritage. During the meal, I found myself seated at a table with other retired officers, sharing memories of cases we had worked together and discussing the changes in the department since our generation had left the force. The conversation inevitably turned to the challenges facing police families, the financial struggles of retirement on a fixed income, and the difficulties of maintaining relationships with children who didn't understand the sacrifices their parents had made. Danny approached our table around 3 o'clock, his breath already smelling of alcohol despite the early hour. He had been making rounds among the guests, apparently fishing for information about his father's estate and making comments about how he expected to finally get what was coming to him, after years of watching his father's money sit in the bank doing nothing, instead of helping the family with their immediate needs. The conversation that followed would haunt me for months. Danny pulled me aside near the coat check, his wife Jessica hovering nearby like a vulture waiting for roadkill. His opening words were shockingly direct. "So, when do I get my cut of the old man's money?" The casual way he referred to his deceased father as the old man, and his immediate focus on financial gain rather than grief or loss told me everything I needed to know about his character. I had been Michael's closest friend and the executor of his estate, a responsibility I had accepted reluctantly, but with the understanding that Michael trusted me to carry out his final wishes exactly as he had specified. The will reading was scheduled for the following week, but Michael had confided in me about his decisions months earlier, explaining his reasoning and asking for my support in what he knew would be a difficult situation. Danny's expectation was that he would inherit the majority of his father's estate, including the house, the retirement accounts, and the life insurance policies totaling approximately $280,000. He had already been making plans for the money, discussing with Jessica how they would use it to pay off their debts, buy a new car, and possibly start the small business they had been talking about for years but never had the discipline or capital to pursue seriously. What Danny didn't realize was that Michael had been documenting his son's behavior for the past 2 years, including photographs of the drug activity at his house, recordings of threatening phone calls, and written records of every loan request and broken promise. Michael had consulted with a lawyer and a financial advisor to ensure that his estate would be distributed in a way that honored his values and protected his legacy. The reading of the will took place the following Tuesday at the law office of Martinez and Associates, a firm that specialized in serving the Latino community and police families. Danny and Jessica arrived early, dressed in their Sunday best and carrying notebooks to record the details of their newfound wealth. Michael's mother Maria was also present, along with his sister Carmen, who had driven down from Milwaukee, and myself as the executor. Attorney Rodriguez began by explaining Michael's state of mind when he had updated his will, noting that he was of sound mind and body and had made his decisions carefully after consulting with financial and legal experts. The first bequests were modest but meaningful: $10,000 to the Police Benevolent Association, $15,000 to the church where the funeral had been held, and $5,000 to the community center where Michael had volunteered with at-risk youth. Maria, Michael's 82-year-old mother, received the house and $50,000 to ensure her comfort during her remaining years. Carmen, who had maintained a respectful relationship with her brother and had never asked for financial help despite her own struggles as a single mother, received $40,000 and Michael's car. Several other family members and close friends received smaller bequests totaling about $30,000. The largest portion of the estate, approximately $125,000, was designated for a scholarship fund that would help children from low-income families in Pilsen attend college or trade school. Michael had specified that the fund should prioritize students who demonstrated good character, community involvement, and academic potential, reflecting the values that had guided his own life and career. For Danny, Michael had left exactly $1, along with a sealed letter that explained his reasoning. The letter, which I was asked to read aloud at Danny's insistence, was devastating in its honesty and finality. Michael had written about his disappointment in his son's choices, his frustration with the constant demands for money, and his hope that being forced to face the consequences of his actions might eventually lead Danny to develop the character and work ethic that had been missing from his life. The letter detailed specific incidents where Danny had lied, stolen, or manipulated his father for financial gain. It mentioned the drug dealers who had used Michael's address, the threats Danny had made when money was refused, and the complete lack of respect he had shown for his father's reputation and career. Michael had written that he hoped Danny would eventually understand that true inheritance comes from values, integrity, and the example we set for others, not from money that can be quickly spent and forgotten. Danny's reaction was explosive and immediate. He screamed about the injustice of the situation, accused me of manipulating his father, and threatened to contest the will in court. Jessica joined in, claiming that Michael had been senile and that the family had a right to his money regardless of his wishes. The scene was so disruptive that security had to be called to escort them from the building. The aftermath of the will reading created a permanent rift in the Torres family. Danny and Jessica hired a lawyer to contest the will, claiming undue influence and mental incompetence. But their case was weak given the extensive documentation Michael had provided and the testimony of multiple witnesses to his sound mental state. The legal proceedings dragged on for 8 months, costing them far more in legal fees than they could have hoped to gain even if they had one. During this period, I found myself reflecting on the nature of family, inheritance, and the responsibility we have to pass on more than just material wealth to the next generation. Michael's decision had been painful but principled, based on his understanding that giving money to someone who hadn't earned it or wouldn't use it responsibly was ultimately more harmful than helpful. The scholarship fund that Michael had established began awarding its first grants a year after his death. The recipients were remarkable young people who embodied the qualities that Michael had valued: hard work, integrity, community service, and determination to overcome obstacles. Seeing these students succeed in college and trade programs was a powerful reminder of the positive impact that Michael's final decision had created. Maria, Michael's mother, thrived in her son's house with the financial security he had provided. She used part of her inheritance to renovate the kitchen and create a small apartment in the basement, which she rented to a young police officer just starting his career. The arrangement provided her with both additional income and the companionship of someone who understood and respected Michael's legacy. Carmen invested her inheritance wisely, using part of it to complete her nursing degree and the rest to buy a small duplex that provided rental income. She often said that Michael's gift had given her the opportunity to build the stable, independent life that she had always wanted but couldn't achieve while struggling as a single mother working multiple jobs. 3 years after the funeral, Danny and Jessica's marriage ended in divorce, their financial problems having been compounded by the legal fees from the unsuccessful will contest and their continued inability to manage money responsibly. Danny eventually found work as a security guard, a job that paid poorly but forced him to develop some of the discipline and responsibility that his father had tried to teach him throughout his life. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on those of us who had known Michael well. His son, who had spent years demanding immediate access to his father's money, had ultimately received exactly what he had earned through his behavior and choices. The inheritance he had counted on to solve his problems would have been spent within months, leaving him in the same financial difficulties but without the motivation to change his underlying patterns of behavior. As executor of Michael's estate, I had the responsibility of overseeing the scholarship fund and ensuring that his wishes were carried out according to his specifications. This role brought me into contact with dozens of young people over the years, many of whom reminded me of Michael at their age. Ambitious, ethical, and committed to serving their communities despite facing significant obstacles and limited resources. One of the scholarship recipients, Maria Elena Vasquez, was particularly special to me because her story so closely paralleled Michael's own journey. She was the daughter of immigrants, the first in her family to attend college, and determined to become a police officer despite the financial and cultural challenges she faced. When she graduated from the police academy 5 years after receiving Michael's scholarship, I was there to pin on her badge, thinking about how proud Michael would have been to see his legacy living on through her service. The annual scholarship dinner became a significant event in the Pilsen community, bringing together current and former police officers, community leaders, and the families of scholarship recipients. Each year, I would tell the story of Michael Torres and explain how his final act of generosity had been made possible by a lifetime of service and sacrifice, funded not by inherited wealth but by money he had earned through decades of dangerous, often thankless work. Danny never attended these events, though he was always invited. His absence was noted by those who knew the family history, and it served as a silent reminder of the choices we make and their long-term consequences. Some people in the community wondered if Michael had been too harsh in his final judgment of his son, but those of us who had witnessed Danny's behavior understood that Michael's decision had been both necessary and merciful. 5 years after Michael's death, I was diagnosed with early-stage cancer, a common occupational hazard for police officers who had spent decades exposed to crime scenes, industrial chemicals, and the chronic stress of law enforcement work. The diagnosis forced me to confront my own mortality and consider how I wanted to spend whatever time I had remaining. During my treatment, I received an unexpected visit from Danny. He looked older, more weathered, and had clearly been struggling with substance abuse issues. He told me that he had been attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and had been sober for 6 months. More importantly, he said he had finally begun to understand what his father had been trying to teach him through the harsh lesson of the will. Danny asked if there was any way he could become involved with the scholarship fund, not as a recipient of money but as a contributor or volunteer. He wanted to share his story with young people who might be making similar mistakes, using his failures as a cautionary tale about the importance of personal responsibility and the consequences of poor choices. After consulting with the scholarship committee and considering Michael's likely wishes, we agreed to let Danny speak at the annual dinner. His presentation was raw, honest, and powerful. He talked about the entitled attitude that had destroyed his relationship with his father, the addiction problems that had followed his financial difficulties, and the slow, painful process of learning to take responsibility for his own life. The audience's response to Danny's presentation was mixed but generally positive. Many young people approached him afterward to ask questions about his experiences and to thank him for his honesty. Some of the older community members remained skeptical, remembering the pain he had caused Michael, but they appreciated his willingness to use his mistakes as teaching opportunities for others. Danny's involvement with the scholarship fund remained limited and carefully supervised, but it represented a genuine step toward redemption and a belated recognition of his father's wisdom. He continued attending AA meetings, found steady employment as a maintenance worker at the community college, and slowly began rebuilding relationships with family members who had distanced themselves during his worst years. 7 years after Michael's death, the scholarship fund had assisted over 40 students in pursuing higher education or trade school training. Many of these recipients had gone on to successful careers in law enforcement, education, healthcare, and business. Several had returned to serve their communities as police officers, teachers, or social workers, creating a multiplying effect of positive impact that extended far beyond the original financial investment. The fund had also grown significantly through additional donations from retired police officers, community members, and businesses that had been touched by the stories of the scholarship recipients. What had started as Michael's personal bequest had evolved into a community institution that honored his memory while providing ongoing support for young people who embodied his values. As I reflect on this experience now, having survived my cancer treatment and entered my own retirement years, I'm struck by the wisdom of Michael's final decision. He understood that true inheritance isn't about money or material possessions, but about values, character, and the example we set for future generations. His choice to redirect his wealth toward education and community service, rather than enabling his son's irresponsible behavior, was ultimately an act of love, even though it was painful for everyone involved. The 3 words I had spoken to Danny at the funeral, "You already did," referred to all the money, opportunities, and support that Michael had provided throughout his son's life. Danny had indeed received his inheritance. He had simply squandered it through poor choices and lack of appreciation. Michael's final will wasn't about punishment or revenge, but about breaking a cycle of dependency and entitlement that was destroying his son's character and potential. Today, when I visit Michael's grave in the cemetery on the south side, I often find fresh flowers left by scholarship recipients who never knew him personally, but whose lives were changed by his generosity. The inscription on his headstone reads simply, "Detective Michael Torres, 1955 to 2018, he served with honor." But his true memorial is the dozens of young people who are building better lives because he chose to invest in their futures rather than enabling destructive behavior. The lesson of Michael's story extends far beyond our specific situation. In a society that often equates love with financial support and measures success through material accumulation, his example reminds us that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to develop their own strength, resilience, and character. True wealth isn't what we leave to our children, but what we leave in them. Danny continues to work on his recovery and personal growth, attending counseling sessions and maintaining his sobriety one day at a time. His relationship with his father's memory has evolved from anger and resentment to understanding and, eventually, gratitude. He now recognizes that Michael's final decision, painful as it was, represented the last attempt of a loving father to teach his son the lessons that money can't buy: self-respect, personal responsibility, and the satisfaction that comes from earning your way in the world. The scholarship fund that bears Michael's name will continue long after all of us who knew him personally are gone, ensuring that his values and his commitment to serving others will influence generations of young people who never had the privilege of meeting him. In this way, his true inheritance, not money, but meaning, will continue to multiply and spread throughout the community he loved and served for 30 years. The transformation I witnessed in Danny over the years following his father's death was both gradual and profound. During his early recovery, he would often call me late at night, struggling with guilt and regret about the years he had wasted and the pain he had caused his father. These conversations were difficult but necessary, as Danny worked through his anger, and began to understand that Michael's harsh lesson had actually been an expression of love, albeit one delivered in a way that was painful for everyone involved. One particularly meaningful moment came during the 5th anniversary of Michael's death, when Danny asked if he could visit his father's grave with me. As we stood together in the quiet cemetery, Danny placed a small American flag next to the headstone and spoke aloud to his father for the first time since the funeral. He apologized for his selfishness, thanked Michael for the difficult lesson that had ultimately saved his life, and promised to continue working toward becoming the man his father had always hoped he could be. The ripple effects of Michael's decision extended far beyond our immediate circle, inspiring other families in the police community to have difficult conversations about inheritance, responsibility, and the difference between helping and enabling. Several retired officers approached me to discuss their own estate planning, wanting to ensure that their final wishes would promote growth and character development rather than dependency among their children and grandchildren. The scholarship fund's impact grew exponentially as recipients began to give back to their communities in ways that multiplied Michael's original investment. Dr. Sofia Martinez, one of the first scholarship recipients who became a pediatrician, established a free clinic in Pilsen that serves undocumented families. Officer Carlos Rivera, another recipient, created a youth mentorship program that pairs at-risk teenagers with police officers, building bridges between law enforcement and the community that Michael had always worked to strengthen. As I entered my 70s, my role as executor evolved into something more like a grandfather figure to the scholarship recipients, many of whom would visit me during holidays and important life events. They would share stories about their careers, their families, and their own plans to give back to their communities. These visits filled my retirement years with purpose and joy, knowing that Michael's legacy was living on through these remarkable young people who carried his values forward into the world. The annual scholarship dinner had become one of the most anticipated events in the Pilsen community, drawing hundreds of attendees and raising additional funds that allowed the program to expand beyond its original scope. Local businesses began sponsoring tables, retired officers established smaller memorial funds for their own colleagues, and even some current police officers started contributing a portion of their paychecks to ensure the program's long-term sustainability. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you are watching from, as well as your thoughts on family dynamics like this. Every perspective matters, because stories like these remind us that while families may face struggles, challenges, and even heartbreak, there is always an opportunity for healing, connection, and growth. By sharing your own reflections, you not only add to the conversation but also create a ripple effect of encouragement for others who may be experiencing something similar. When you engage, whether it's through commenting, liking, or subscribing, you are helping us build a space where families can feel less alone and more supported. Many people silently carry burdens within their homes, and often just hearing that someone else understands can provide an enormous sense of relief and hope. This channel is more than a platform for stories. It's a community where resilience, compassion, and solidarity take center stage. Your support allows us to continue creating and sharing content that uplifts, inspires, and shines a light on the very real challenges that families go through. We believe that even in the most difficult circumstances, there are lessons to be learned and strength to be found. And together, by engaging with these stories, we can remind one another that no family has to navigate their journey in isolation. So please, if this message resonates with you, don't hesitate to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're not just supporting us. You're standing with countless families around the world who find courage and comfort in knowing that they are part of a wider circle of understanding and care. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping us continue to share these powerful stories of resilience and hope.